there are some hypotheses that, as you mentioned, before you start feeling this kind of tremors, there is some disturbances in your gut. And there are some hypotheses that claim that alpha-synuclein aggregation starts in the gut and is somehow trafficked to the brain. What are these things? Could you please elaborate?
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting topic as well. So, because the pathology was found first in the brain stem and only later in the brain, people started looking. Let's go down. Let's continue looking where we find synuclein accumulation. And they found in the gut, in different tissues, they find Lewy bodies. So then the question is, do they start there or do they start in the brain? And there's now a theory that says you can have cases where it first starts in the body. So it's the body first and then brain later. And then this would be, or these would be cases where the pathology would spread possibly from the gut all the way into the brain through the vagus nerve. This could be one route. And we can come back to this. There's interesting studies there. And there are other cases that seem to start more in the brain and eventually the pathology progresses to the gut. So this, how do researchers study this? Well, they track the symptoms and they see that in some people before they had motor problems, they had already gut problems, and in other people they didn't have any intestinal problems and they had already hyposmia and problems in the brain, and only later they got these problems. This is still an hypothesis because eventually when Parkinson's disease is diagnosed, you already have both. So you need to couple this with certain imaging techniques. So you can image, for example, innervation of the heart, and this is something that is lost in some of the body first cases. So it gives us some ideas that then can be tested in animal models. And in animal models, it seems that you can inject pathology in the gut and eventually see it in the brain, and vice versa. You can also inject in the brain and eventually see it in the gut. So these are studies that suggest that there can be these at least two different forms. And there were some interesting studies, and there's some epidemiological data suggesting that patients that had a vagotomy performed, so they sectioned the vagus nerve because of some other autonomic problems, that this reduces the risk for Parkinson's. It doesn't eliminate, so it means that there's another route, and now people are looking into these possible routes as well. But it seems that the vagus nerve can be a highway through which pathology spreads. How it happens, like you mentioned before, we still don't know. What we know is that you would have to have in some cells in the gut this aggregated protein, and that then this would have to be transported through those intestinal neurons up to the vagus nerve, and then they would have to communicate with neurons in the brain and spread pathology to induce the aggregation of the protein in the brain. How it happens, we still don't know. It's a very interesting problem from the cell biology perspective, because this makes us have to understand how proteins are exocytosed or released from cells, how proteins are endocytosed. There's now this exciting data suggesting that cells may form these structures that can connect to cells, and they are like nanotubes. And people have seen different proteins and mitochondria and lysosomes traffic inside these actin structures between cells, and people have been able to label these proteins, alpha-synuclein and other proteins, and they saw that this protein seems to go from one cell to the next. Now, a lot of this has been done in vitro, because in the human brain it's not easy to image these very tiny structures and to label them. But in principle, it seems that this is possible. And now with cryo-EM and all these tools, people are using more complex models, and they are trying to image these structures. Now, I don't think there will be only one route for proteins to be transported between cells. I think there's several, and maybe one is more responsible for the trafficking than others, but I think several pathways can be involved in the transport of proteins between cells. So we don't know exactly how it happens.
Neuroscience and beyond. Know more. Get inspired.